For 10 years, Marcus Hendricks searched for the ghost who left gifts on his desk every Christmas Eve, never knowing that the woman he hunted was the janitor who cleaned his office each night, never suspecting that she was repaying a debt to the wife he had lost, never imagining that when he finally caught her, she would not just solve a decade-long mystery, but shatter the walls of grief he had built around his heart. It began with a simple scarf and an unsigned note. It would end with a revelation that would transform them both. But first, there would be 10 years of searching. 10 years of loneliness. 10 years of gifts, left in the darkness by hands that trembled with gratitude and grief. Before continuing the story, please subscribe. I need to reach 1,000 subscribers to be able to bring you stories like this every day. For you, it's just a click. But for me, it means a lot. Marcus Hendricks stood alone in his corner office on the 42nd floor, the city sprawling beneath him like a constellation of distant stars. It was Christmas Eve, and the building was empty, silent except for the hum of heating vents and the whisper of wind against reinforced glass. He had sent everyone home hours ago, their laughter and holiday wishes fading down elevator shafts, leaving him in the solitude he had grown accustomed to. At 52, Marcus had built Hendricks Tower from nothing, transforming a single construction contract into an empire of steel and glass. He had clawed his way up from a childhood in a neighborhood where dreams went to die, where his father's calloused hands and broken back had taught him that success was the only escape. And he had escaped. He had conquered. But victory, he had learned, could be the coldest companion. His desk was clear, organized with the precision of a man who controlled every variable in his life, which was why the scarf caught his attention immediately. It sat in the center of his leather desk pad, folded with care, the deep blue wool catching the lamplight. Marcus approached slowly, his hand hovering over it as though it might vanish if touched. The knitting was simple, honest, the work of patient hands. Small imperfections marked the pattern, tiny irregularities that spoke of humanity rather than machinery. A cream-colored card rested on top, the handwriting feminine and careful, for warmth on cold nights. No signature, no explanation. Marcus lifted the scarf, and something unexpected tightened in his chest. The wool was soft, real, made by someone who had taken time, who had thought of him. When was the last time anyone had thought of him as anything other than a signature on a contract, a name on a building, a checkbook with legs? 2 years had passed since Claire died. 2 years since the aneurysm stole her between one heartbeat and the next, leaving him holding her hand in a hospital room, unable to comprehend how someone so alive could simply stop. She had been his conscience, his compass, the part of him that remembered to be human. Without her, he had become efficient, isolated, a machine that generated profit and little else. He pulled out his phone and called security. Check the executive floor footage for the past 4 hours. Someone entered my office. The guard's confusion crackled through the speaker. Sir, the logs show no access to your floor except your own entry. The elevators require key cards after hours, and yours is the only one activated today. Marcus pulled up the security feeds on his computer, scanning backward through empty hallways and dark offices. Nothing. No one. The scarf had appeared as though materialized from air. He should have dismissed it, should have assumed some glitch in the system, some explanation rooted in logic. Instead, he wrapped the scarf around his neck. The wool held a faint scent of lavender. And for just a moment, standing in his empty office overlooking a city celebrating with people he would never know, Marcus Hendricks felt seen. He kept the scarf, folded it carefully, and placed it in his desk drawer, where it lay like a question he could not answer, a kindness he did not understand, a mystery that would haunt him for the next 10 years. The second year, Marcus waited. He arrived at the office on Christmas Eve morning and did not leave. He watched the security monitors, personally reviewed every person who entered the building, scrutinized the cleaning crews and maintenance workers. At midnight, exhausted, he walked to his desk and found a tin of homemade cookies. Still warm, their scent filling the room with cinnamon and vanilla. The note read, "May sweetness find you." His hands shook as he lifted one to his mouth. They were snickerdoodles, Claire's favorite, made exactly the way she used to make them, with that hint of nutmeg that most recipes omitted. He had not tasted them since she died. Marcus played back the footage, frame by frame. Nothing. No one had entered his office. He increased security patrols, installed additional cameras, but the mysterious giver was smoke, was shadow, was impossible. The third year brought a small watercolor painting, no larger than his hand. It depicted the coffee shop where he and Claire had their first date, a place that had closed 5 years ago, rendered in soft blues and grays that captured not just the building but the feeling of that day, the nervousness and hope of two people discovering each other. How could anyone know? He had told no one that story in years. The painting hung in his office now. A window into a past that hurt to remember but hurt worse to forget. Marcus began interviewing staff personally. Casual conversations that probed for information without revealing his purpose. He learned the names of people who had worked in his building for years, faces he had passed without seeing. The head of janitorial services, the night security supervisor, the facilities manager. None of them knew anything. Or perhaps they were all exceptional liars. The fourth year broke something inside him. On his desk sat a vintage watch, the one his father had given him the day he started his first construction job. The one Marcus had thrown away in anger after his father's funeral, unable to look at it without seeing the old man's wasted life. Someone had retrieved it. Had it restored, the cracked crystal replaced, the leather band repaired, the brass case polished until it gleamed. The note said simply, "Time is precious. Hold it gently." Marcus wept at his desk that night, something he had not done since Claire's funeral. Great wrenching sobs that echoed in the empty office. Who was this person? What did they want? Why did they know the geography of his heart better than he knew it himself? He hired private investigators, had them research every employee, every contractor, every person who had access to the building. Thousands of dollars spent chasing a ghost who left only kindness in their wake. The fifth year brought a pressed flower in a simple wooden frame, a white rose preserved behind glass. Claire had carried white roses at their wedding. The note offered no words, just a small, hand-drawn heart. Marcus stood at his window that night, the city celebrating below, and realized he had become a man obsessed. He thought about the mysterious giver constantly, constructed elaborate theories, imagined confrontations and revelations. His board noticed his distraction. His assistant suggested therapy. But how could he explain that the only person who seemed to truly see him was someone he had never seen? Someone who moved through his life like a benevolent spirit, leaving pieces of his own humanity behind for him to rediscover. The loneliness had become a physical thing, a weight he carried through empty hallways and silent evenings. He had built an empire and furnished it with ghosts. The sixth year transformed Marcus from curious to consumed. He hired Thompson Investigations, the most expensive firm in the city, paying them to shadow him, to monitor the building, to create a profile of anyone who might have access to his personal history. They installed microcameras, motion detectors invisible to the naked eye, thermal imaging sensors. The building became a fortress designed to catch one person who left only love behind. Christmas Eve arrived, and Marcus sat in his office, surrounded by monitors, watching every angle, every corridor, every elevator shaft. At 2 a.m, his head heavy with exhaustion, he closed his eyes for just a moment. When he opened them, a photograph sat on his desk, and the investigators had captured nothing. The photo showed Marcus and Claire at the Grand Canyon, her head thrown back in laughter, his arm around her waist. Both of them young and whole, and unaware that time was already counting down. He had thought this photo lost in a flood that damaged their basement 3 years after her death. He had mourned its loss almost as much as he mourned her. Someone had found it, restored it, had it professionally preserved behind museum-quality glass. The note read, Joy is never truly lost. It lives in those who remember. Marcus dismissed the investigators. Whatever magic surrounded his mysterious benefactor could not be caught by cameras or logic. The 7th year brought a children's book, its cover worn soft with age, its pages yellowed but intact, Where the Wild Things Are. The exact edition his mother had read to him every night of his childhood, her voice making the monsters friendly and the lonely boy's journey home feel possible. Marcus had not seen this book since he was 8 years old. Since the year his mother left and never returned, taking nothing with her but the clothes on her back, leaving him with a father who worked himself to death and a hole where love should have been. He opened the book and found his mother's handwriting on the inside cover. For my wild thing, may you always find your way home. Love, Mama. His hands trembled so violently he nearly dropped it. How? How could anyone have found this? He had spent years trying to locate his mother, had hired investigators even then, and found nothing. Yet someone had reached into his past and retrieved this piece of his broken childhood. The company hit record profits that year. Hendricks Tower expanded into 3 more cities. Forbes featured him on their cover, calling him a visionary. But Marcus felt hollow. A shell of success wrapped around a man desperate for connection with someone he could not find. He began writing letters, leaving them on his desk each night before he left the office. "Dear friend," he would write, "thank you for seeing me when I had forgotten how to see myself. Please, tell me who you are. Let me thank you properly." The letters remained untouched. No response came. He wrote about Claire, about the grief that had calcified around his heart, about the loneliness of standing at the top of a tower he had built to escape his past, only to find himself trapped there. He wrote about his mother, his father, the child he and Claire never had, the life he had built, and the life he had lost. Still, silence. The 8th year brought a hand-carved wooden bird, a cardinal, Claire's favorite, painted with such care that its feathers seemed to catch light. The note said, "She would want you to sing again." Marcus held the bird and realized he had not laughed, truly laughed, since Claire died 6 years ago. Had not felt joy that was not immediately followed by guilt for feeling it. His mysterious benefactor understood this somehow. Understood the prison he had built inside himself. That night, he wrote his longest letter yet, pouring out everything, begging for just one word, one sign, one moment of revelation. He sealed it in an envelope and left it prominently displayed. Christmas morning, the letter sat unopened, and beside it, nothing. Marcus felt its absence like a death. And he understood, finally, that he had fallen in love with a ghost, with kindness itself, with the only person who had bothered to know him. Marcus Hendricks woke before dawn on Christmas Eve, the 10th anniversary of the first gift, and felt the familiar mixture of anticipation and dread that had marked this day for a decade. He was 45 years old, wealthier than he had ever imagined possible, respected and feared in equal measure, and so profoundly alone that some mornings he wondered if he had become a ghost himself, haunting the tower that bore his name. The previous night, after the building emptied, he had personally installed the final components of his plan. Pressure sensors beneath the carpet outside his office door, motion-activated cameras hidden in the air vents, a sophisticated alert system connected directly to his phone. He had learned from 9 years of failure. This time, he had told no one, not even his head of security, whoever his mysterious benefactor was. They had proven themselves capable of circumventing every conventional security measure. But they could not circumvent physics itself. They could not enter his office without triggering at least one sensor. He arrived at Hendricks Tower as the winter sun struggled to penetrate the heavy clouds gathering over the city. Snow had been forecast, the first real accumulation of the season, and already small flakes drifted past his windows like frozen moths seeking light. The building felt cavernous in its emptiness, his footsteps echoing through the marble lobby, the elevator rising in silence to the 42nd floor. His office looked the same as it had for 10 years. deliberately preserved like a museum exhibit. The scarf from the first year hung on a hook behind his door. The painting sat on his credenza, the watch encircled his wrist. The photograph of him and Claire occupied the place of honor on his desk. Beside the cardinal that seemed to watch him with painted eyes, he had kept every gift, arranged them like artifacts of an archaeology of kindness, evidence that someone in this world cared whether he suffered or healed. Marcus checked his phone, confirming that all sensors were active, all cameras recording. Then he settled into his chair to wait. The hours crawled past. He reviewed contracts he had no interest in, returned emails that could have waited until the new year, anything to occupy his mind and keep exhaustion at bay. He had made this mistake before, falling asleep at the crucial moment. Not tonight. Tonight he would have his answer. He had convinced himself over the past year that finding this person would unlock something inside him, would allow him to finally move forward from Claire's death, would restore his capacity for connection. The mysterious giver had become the center of his emotional life, the one relationship that felt real, even though it existed only in absence and artifact. Therapy had taught him this was unhealthy, that he was projecting, creating an idealized figure to avoid the messy reality of actual human connection. He had stopped going to therapy. Outside, snow began to fall in earnest, transforming the city into something softer, quieter, almost gentle. Marcus stood at his window and watched people hurrying home, their arms full of packages, their faces turned against the cold. Somewhere down there was the person who had shaped the last 10 years of his life. Somewhere in the thousands of faces was the one who knew him better than anyone. By morning, he would know their name. He would look into their eyes and finally understand. The loneliness would end. It had to end, because if it did not, if this mystery remained forever unsolved, Marcus feared he would calcify completely, become nothing but the tower itself, all glass and steel and empty spaces where a heart should beat. Sarah Mitchell's apartment was small enough that she could stand in the center and touch both walls if she stretched her arms wide, but it was clean, warm, and theirs. At 38 years old, she had learned to measure wealth not in square footage or bank balances, but in simpler metrics. Whether the heat worked when winter came, whether there was food in the refrigerator, whether her daughter Emma smiled more than she worried. This morning, Christmas Eve morning, Sarah stood at her kitchen counter, wrapping a gift in simple brown paper, her fingers moving with practiced care. She had been awake since 5, having finished her overnight shift at the diner at 4:30, her feet aching from 8 hours of carrying plates and forcing smiles at customers who looked through her as though she were furniture. In 6 hours, she would return to Hendricks Tower for her second job, the night janitorial shift that paid just enough to keep them afloat. 2 jobs, 16-hour days, and still every month was a calculation of which bills could wait and which would result in disconnection notices. But Sarah carried her exhaustion with dignity, her head high despite the weight of it. She had worked too hard to escape homelessness to ever take for granted the roof over their heads, however modest. The brown paper crinkled under her hands as she folded the edges with geometric precision. Inside lay a hand-carved wooden box, small enough to fit in her palm, made from reclaimed oak she had found and sanded smooth over months of stolen moments. She had burned words into the lid using a tool borrowed from Emma's school art room. Each letter formed with trembling care. The quote was one she had memorized 13 years ago. Words that had changed her life. "Emma, sweetie, can you check if we have any ribbon?" Sarah called toward the bedroom. Her daughter emerged, 12 years old and beautiful, with Sarah's dark hair and a smile that could dissolve the hardest day. Emma was smart, curious, kind in ways that made Sarah's chest ache with fierce pride and fiercer fear. The world was not gentle with kind girls, especially poor ones. "Are you doing it again this year?" Emma asked, holding a spool of white ribbon she had found in the craft box. "The gift for the man in the tower?" Sarah nodded, not trusting her voice. Every year Emma asked the same question, and every year Sarah felt the same mixture of determination, and fear. "Why don't you ever tell him who you are?" Emma settled onto the couch, watching her mother work. "You've been doing this for 10 years. That's my whole life, practically. Don't you think he'd want to know?" Sarah tied the ribbon with careful loops, creating something beautiful from simple materials. "Some debts can't be repaid with words, baby. Some things you do because they need doing, not because anyone's watching." She did not tell Emma about the fear that lived in her chest, the knowledge that Marcus Hendricks could fire her with a word, that her anonymity was the only thing that made the gifts pure, untainted by expectation or obligation. She did not explain that she was just a janitor, invisible in the hierarchy of his world, and that revealing herself might shatter the one way she had found to honor the woman who had saved them both. Emma helped her pack the gift in her work bag, along with her cleaning supplies and spare uniform. Outside, snow was beginning to fall, and Sarah watched the flakes drift past their window, each one brief and singular, and somehow enough. Tonight she would climb to the 42nd floor as she had for 10 years. Tonight she would leave her final gift, because something in her bones told her this was the last time. That 10 years was long enough to carry this particular grief, this particular gratitude. She kissed Emma's forehead and headed out into the cold, carrying kindness wrapped in brown paper, unaware that the man she sought to honor was waiting with cameras and sensors and a desperation that mirrored her own. 11 years ago, Sarah Mitchell lived in her car. It was a battered Honda Civic, with a broken heater and windows that no longer sealed properly against the wind, and it was parked 3 blocks from Hendricks Tower because the street had lighting and she felt safer there than in the darker areas where police would not bother to patrol. She was 5 months pregnant, 27 years old, and so far past desperate that she had stopped crying because tears required energy she could not spare. The father had disappeared the moment he learned about the baby. Her parents, deeply religious and deeply disappointed, had made their position clear. She had made her choices and would live with the consequences without dragging the family name through the mud. She had lost her apartment when she lost her job when morning sickness made her unreliable, lost everything in a cascade of failures that seemed designed to teach her that the world had no safety net for women like her. December was brutal that year, the kind of cold that killed. And Sarah knew she was dying by degrees. Not dramatically, not quickly, but slowly, freezing from the outside in, her body growing weaker each day. Despite her efforts to protect the life growing inside her, she spent her days in the public library pretending to read while absorbing heat, and her nights in the car, buried under every piece of clothing she owned, feeling the baby kick against her ribs as if urging her to fight harder. It was Christmas Eve when Claire Hendricks found her. Sarah had been sitting on the steps of Hendricks Tower at dawn, drawn by the warmth that leaked from the building's ventilation, when a woman in an elegant coat emerged for an early morning walk. Claire could have passed by, could have averted her eyes as so many others did, could have dropped some change and walked away feeling charitable. Instead, she sat down on the cold steps beside Sarah and asked her name. "I'm Claire," she said, and her voice was gentle but not pitying, firm but not judgmental. "And you're pregnant and freezing, and that's not acceptable. Not on Christmas Eve. Not ever." Claire did not just give money, though she gave that too. She got Sarah into a shelter that night, but she did not stop there. She returned the next day, and the next, and the next. Claire managed the Hendricks Foundation, Marcus's charitable organization. But she treated Sarah not as a case file, but as a person, a friend, someone whose potential she could see beneath the layers of bad luck and hardship. She found Sarah a job in the tower's janitorial department, a position with benefits and steady hours. She co-signed for a small apartment, furnished it with items from her own home, attended doctor's appointments when Sarah had no one else to sit beside her. When Emma was born in March, Claire was in the waiting room, and she was the first person beside Sarah to hold the baby. "She's perfect," Claire had whispered, tears streaming down her face, and Sarah understood that this woman who had saved her was also somehow sad, that perhaps she and Marcus had wanted children and never had them, that maybe helping Sarah had filled some empty space in Claire's own heart. Over the next 2 years, Claire became the mother Sarah had lost, the friend she had never had, the angel she had stopped believing existed. They met for coffee every week, Claire offering advice on motherhood and life with the easy wisdom of someone who had lived fully and loved deeply. She never made Sarah feel less than, never treated her charity as anything other than friendship. And she made Sarah promise one thing: pass kindness forward. When you're strong enough, when you're stable enough, find someone who needs what you needed, and be for them what I've been for you. Sarah had promised, her hand clasped in Claire's, both of them laughing at Emma's attempts to eat her own feet. Then Claire died. Sudden, shocking, an aneurysm that took her between one breath and the next. Sarah learned about it third hand, a rumor among the cleaning staff, because she was not family, not important enough to be notified. She attended the funeral from the back row, invisible among hundreds of mourners, weeping for the woman who had seen her when the world looked away. She could not pass kindness forward. Not yet. Not when she was still barely surviving, still working 2 jobs to provide for Emma. But she could honor Claire's memory. She could give back to the man Claire had loved, the man Sarah had seen from a distance, tall and handsome, and already disappearing into grief. She could not save him, but she could remind him that he was seen, that kindness existed, that Claire's legacy lived on. And so, on the first Christmas Eve after Claire's death, Sarah left a scarf she had knitted with yarn Claire had once given her. She left it and ran, terrified and determined, beginning a decade-long conversation with grief, gratitude. Sarah Mitchell clocked in at Hendricks Tower at precisely 11 o'clock, her badge scanning with a familiar beep that usually brought comfort but tonight sounded like an alarm. Her hands trembled as she loaded her cleaning cart, checking twice that the brown paper package was hidden beneath her supplies, tucked between bottles of disinfectant and rolls of paper towels where no one would think to look. The security guard at the desk, Thomas, barely glanced up. After 10 years, Sarah was invisible, part of the building's infrastructure, as unremarkable as the elevator cables or ventilation system. She had built her entire strategy around this invisibility, this universal truth that people in power rarely noticed those who cleaned up after them. But tonight felt different. She had noticed new cameras in recent months, tiny lenses tucked into corners where none had been before. The security patrols had increased. Thomas checked his monitors more frequently, his attention sharper than usual. Someone was looking for something, and Sarah's instincts whispered that she was what they sought. She began on the 10th floor, as always, working her way methodically upward. The vacuum cleaner hummed its familiar song as she moved through empty conference rooms and dark cubicles. Trash cans emptied, surfaces wiped, floors cleaned. The work was meditative, repetitive, and it gave her time to think, to remember, to question whether tonight should be her last. 10 years. Emma had been 2 years old when this began, barely talking, still needing to be carried. Now she was 12, growing into a young woman who asked hard questions and deserved honest answers. How much longer could Sarah maintain this secret ritual? How much longer should she? By the 20th floor, Sarah's feet ached and her back protested. But her mind had traveled further. She remembered the 2nd year, when she had left cookies using Claire's recipe. The same cookies Claire used to bring to staff meetings, insisting that important decisions required sugar and cinnamon. She remembered the 4th year, when she had somehow found the courage to retrieve Marcus's father's watch from a dumpster 3 blocks away, having overheard him tell his assistant about throwing it away, the pain in his voice revealing that he regretted the decision even as he made it. Each gift had required detective work, careful listening, attention to the small revelations people made when they thought no one important was listening. Sarah had learned Marcus Hendricks by collecting fragments. A comment about his mother's favorite book, a photograph he kept face down in his desk drawer, the way his shoulders sagged on the anniversary of Claire's death. She had studied him the way scholars studied ancient texts searching for meaning in every detail. The 30th floor brought doubt. What if he was angry? What if he felt violated by her knowledge of his private pain? What if revealing herself destroyed the purity of what she had been doing? The gifts were meant to honor Claire, to pass forward the kindness Sarah could never repay. But maybe she had been doing this for herself, using Marcus's grief as a way to process her own. Hiding behind anonymity because she was afraid of being truly seen. By the 40th floor, Sarah had made her decision. Tonight would be the last time. 10 years was enough. Emma needed a mother who was fully present, not divided between the living and the dead. Marcus needed to move forward, not remain tethered to a mystery. And Sarah needed to release this beautiful burden she had carried, this love letter to a woman who had saved her life. She checked the clock. 1:45 in the morning. The executive floor awaited, quiet and dark except for emergency lighting. Sarah touched the package hidden in her cot, feeling the smooth wood through the paper. Inside the box, burned into the oak, were the words Claire had lived by. The greatest gift is to be a gift to others. Sarah pushed her cart toward the elevator, her heart hammering against her ribs. She knew the blind spots by heart, knew exactly how to move through the executive suite without triggering the standard motion sensors. She had done this successfully for 9 years. One more time. Just one more time. And then she would be free. The elevator doors opened, and Sarah stepped inside, carrying the final gift toward a man who had been waiting for this moment for 10 years. Sarah's shoes made no sound on the carpeted hallway of the 42nd floor. The executive suite stretched before her like a cathedral. All glass and shadows, the city glittering far below through floor-to-ceiling windows. She had cleaned this space 1,000 times, knew every surface, every corner, every place where dust gathered despite her efforts. Marcus Hendricks's office door stood open. Darkness beyond. Sarah approached with her cart, the package clutched in her hand. Her heart beat so loudly she was certain it would wake the dead. She had mapped her route with precision. Knew she had perhaps 90 seconds before the next security patrol checked the monitor feeds. 90 seconds to leave 10 years of gratitude and grief, and finally walk away. She crossed the threshold into his office. The desk stood before her, vast and neat, the photograph of him and Claire visible even in the dim light. Sarah placed the wooden box gently on the leather desk pad, her fingers lingering for just a moment. Goodbye, Claire. Goodbye to this ritual that had sustained her and trapped her in equal measure. She turned to leave. The lights blazed on with blinding intensity. Sarah gasped, her hand flying to her mouth, every muscle in her body screaming to run. Marcus Hendricks stepped out from behind a cabinet near the window, and she understood she had been watched, had walked into a trap set with the patience of a decade. "Please don't run," he said, and his voice was not angry but achingly gentle, the voice of a man speaking to something fragile that might shatter at any moment. "Please." Sarah froze, her hands clutching the handle of her cleaning cart so tightly her knuckles turned white. Terror flooded through her in waves. She would lose her job, she would lose everything. Emma, the apartment, the stability she had fought so hard to build. All of it would crumble because she had overstepped, had presumed too much, had forgotten the vast distance between a janitor and the man who owned the tower. Her voice came out broken, barely a whisper. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean. I should never have." Marcus took a step forward, his hands raised as though approaching a wounded animal. In the harsh fluorescent light, Sarah saw him clearly for the first time. Not from a distance, but face to face. He looked exhausted, haunted, 10 years older than his age, and his eyes were wet. 10 years, he said, his voice rough with emotion. "You've been doing this for 10 years. I just want to know why. Please, I need to understand." He gestured to the photograph on his desk, to the gifts arranged like a shrine. "Please don't be afraid. I just need to know who you are." Sarah's hands trembled violently. She could not speak, could not move, could only stand there clutching her cart while her entire world balanced on the edge of a moment she had never wanted to arrive. Tears spilled down her cheeks, hot and sudden, and she realized she had been crying for 10 years without knowing it, had been carrying this weight so long she had forgotten what it felt like to put it down. "Please," Marcus whispered again, and Sarah heard in his voice the same desperate loneliness that had driven her here every Christmas Eve. The same need to connect across an impossible distance, the same hope that kindness might somehow be enough to heal what grief had broken. Sarah's legs threatened to give out beneath her. She gripped the cart harder, using it like a lifeline, and forced herself to meet Marcus Hendricks's eyes. In them she saw not anger but a desperate hunger for understanding. And it gave her the courage to speak. "Your wife," she began, her voice breaking on the words. "Claire. She saved my life." Marcus went very still, his face draining of color. "What?" The story poured out of Sarah in fragments, punctuated by tears she could no longer hold back. She told him about the car, the freezing winter, the pregnancy with no hope attached to it. She told him about the morning Claire found her on the steps, about how his wife had not simply offered charity, but had offered humanity, dignity, a future when Sarah could see no path forward. "She got me a job here," Sarah whispered, gesturing to her cleaning cart, to the uniform she wore. "She found me an apartment. She went to doctor's appointments with me. She was there when Emma was born." The sobs were coming harder now. 10 years of grief compressed into this single moment. "She was the kindest person I have ever known. And when she died, I couldn't breathe. I couldn't let her go." Marcus sank into his desk chair as though his legs would no longer support him. "I didn't know. Claire ran the foundation. She helped so many people, but she never. I was working so much then, building the company. And after she died, I couldn't." His voice fractured. "I couldn't look at her files. I couldn't touch anything she had done. It hurt too much." "The gifts," Sarah continued, her words tumbling out now that the dam had broken. "They were all her. The scarf was knitted from yarn she gave me once, teaching me how to make something with my hands. She said it was therapeutic, creating warmth for others." Sarah gestured toward the tin on his shelf. "The cookies were her recipe. She taught me to make them in her kitchen while Emma played on the floor. She said snickerdoodles were about love, measuring out sweetness carefully." Marcus lifted the vintage watch from his wrist with shaking hands, staring at it as though seeing it for the first time. "Claire told me once, when we met for coffee, that you never made time for yourself," Sarah said. "She worried about you, how hard you worked, how you measured your worth in buildings and contracts. She showed me a picture of that watch and said your father gave it to you, that it reminded you where you came from. When I heard you'd thrown it away, I knew you were hurting yourself, punishing yourself. I had to get it back." "The photograph," Marcus whispered, touching the frame on his desk. "The one from the Grand Canyon. Claire kept copies of everything in her office at the foundation. After she died, before they cleaned out her space, I went through it. I couldn't help myself. I needed to keep pieces of her." Sarah wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "I found that picture in a folder labeled Joy." She had written on the back, "The day I knew I would love him forever. The flood damaged your copy, but hers survived." Marcus stood abruptly, crossed to where Sarah stood frozen. And before she could react, he wrapped his arms around her. He was shaking, great tremors running through his entire body. And Sarah realized he was weeping, the kind of deep sobs that came from a place beyond words. "She never told me," he choked out against Sarah's shoulder. "She never told me about you, all those people she helped, all those lives she changed, and she never needed credit, never needed recognition." He pulled back, his face wet, his eyes red. "And you've been honoring her all this time. You've been keeping her alive when I was letting her fade. Every gift was something she gave me first," Sarah said softly. "I was just passing it forward, the way she made me promise, the way she lived." Marcus could not stop crying. Years of grief that he had compressed into silence, into work, into obsession, came flooding out in waves that shook his entire body. He stumbled back to his desk, sinking into his chair. And Sarah, after a moment of hesitation, pulled up the chair across from him, the one where executives and board members usually sat. Tonight she was not a janitor and he was not a CEO. They were two people who had loved the same woman and lost her. She used to sing while she cooked, Marcus said through his tears, a smile breaking through the sorrow. Completely off-key, these old folk songs her grandmother taught her. I would come home from work and hear her murdering some ballad about lost love or sailing ships, and I would stand in the doorway just listening because it was the most beautiful sound in the world. Sarah laughed, a wet, broken sound. She sang to Emma once. We were in the park and Emma was crying, and Claire just started singing this ridiculous song about a rabbit who lost his hat. Emma stopped crying immediately, not because the song was good, but because Claire was so confidently terrible at it. They traded stories like currency, each memory a treasure they had hoarded alone for too long. Marcus told Sarah about their first date, how Claire had spilled coffee all over herself and laughed instead of being embarrassed. How she had made him laugh when he had forgotten he knew how. Sarah told him about the day Claire taught her to make a budget, sitting at Sarah's tiny kitchen table with a notebook and patience. Never once making Sarah feel stupid for not knowing, for having to learn survival at 27. I wrote you letters, Marcus said suddenly, opening his desk drawer. Inside were dozens of envelopes, sealed and stacked neatly. After the 5th year, I started writing to you, to whoever you were. I thought if I could just find you, if I could just understand, it would somehow. He trailed off, his hands trembling on the pile of letters. Bring her back, Sarah finished softly. I know. I thought the same thing, that if I kept leaving gifts, if I kept her memory alive this way, she wouldn't really be gone. Marcus looked at her, truly looked at her, and Sarah saw recognition in his eyes, the understanding of someone who had been drowning recognizing another person underwater. We've been frozen, he said. Both of us. Locked in that moment we lost her. I was afraid, Sarah admitted, her voice barely audible. Afraid that if I stopped, if I let go of this ritual, I would forget her. That Emma would grow up not knowing that the only reason we survived was because of a stranger's kindness. That Claire would just disappear. She made me human, Marcus said. Before her, I was just ambition and anger, just a poor kid trying to prove he mattered. She taught me how to be kind, how to see people, how to live instead of just survive. And when she died, I forgot all of it. I became exactly what I was before her, maybe worse. Sarah reached across the desk and took his hand. The gesture was bold, crossing every boundary of class and position, but it felt right. She wouldn't want this for us, for either of us. She would want us to live, to love, to keep passing kindness forward, not out of obligation, but out of joy. Marcus squeezed her hand, and they sat in silence, two people who had been alone in their grief. The sky outside began to lighten, darkness giving way to the gray promise of dawn, and Marcus realized they had been talking for hours. The city below was waking, early risers venturing into the snow that had blanketed everything in white, and he had never felt more present, more alive, than in this moment, with a woman whose name he had not known 12 hours ago. Sarah told him about Emma, about her daughter's love of books and science, about the way she asked impossible questions and deserved better answers than a mother working 2 jobs could provide between exhaustion and fear. She spoke of the diner shifts that left her feet bleeding, of the arithmetic of poverty that meant choosing between heat and food, between medicine and rent, between surviving today and planning for tomorrow. Marcus felt shame settle over him like a weight. You've worked here for 10 years, he said quietly. You've cleaned my office, moved through my building, and I never once saw you. I never knew your name. He gestured to the tower around them, to the empire he had built. All these people who make this place run, who keep it functioning, and I convinced myself that success meant not needing to know them, not needing to care. Claire cared, Sarah said. She knew everyone's names. She asked about their families. She made people feel seen. Claire was better than me. Marcus said. I've spent 10 years forgetting everything she tried to teach me. Sarah shook her head. No, you kept every gift. You searched for me. You wrote letters. You weren't frozen, Marcus. You were waiting to remember how to feel. Marcus reached for the wooden box on his desk. The gift Sarah had left. The final piece of a decade-long conversation. His hands shook as he lifted the lid. Inside, burned into the oak with careful precision, were words he had not heard in 10 years. The greatest gift is to be a gift to others. Claire's voice echoed in his memory, saying those exact words, her personal philosophy. The lens through which she viewed the world. He remembered her saying it the night they got engaged. Explaining why she wanted to run the foundation. Why giving back mattered more than accumulating wealth. She said this the day we met. Sarah whispered. When I tried to thank her. When I asked how I could ever repay her. She said this, and she made me promise to pass it forward. They both wept then, tears falling onto the wooden box, onto 10 years of grief and gratitude, onto the memory of a woman who had understood that the purpose of life was not to gather but to give, not to build walls but to build bridges, not to stand alone but to lift others up. And in their shared tears, something began to howl. Something that had been frozen for far too long began, finally, to thaw. Marcus would not let Sarah leave. I want to meet Emma, he said, and it was not a request but a need, an urgency born from years of isolation. Please, it's Christmas morning. Let me do this. Let me start trying to be the person Claire believed I could be. Sarah hesitated, thought of her daughter waking alone in their small apartment, thought of the vast distance between their world and his. But she saw something in Marcus's eyes that she recognized. The same desperate hunger for connection that had driven her to leave gifts for 10 years. She made the call. 2 hours later, Emma stood in Marcus Hendricks's penthouse, her mouth open in wonder. The space was enormous. All windows and light, with a Christmas tree that touched the 12-foot ceiling, decorated with ornaments that must have cost more than Sarah made in a month. But it was Emma's reaction that broke something open in Marcus's chest. She moved through the space with pure joy, exclaiming over every detail, her excitement unfiltered by the cynicism that came with age and disappointment. Mom, there's a real fireplace. And look at the snow from up here. You can see the whole city. Emma pressed her face to the window, and Marcus saw Claire in her wonder, remembered when the world had felt magical instead of transactional. He cooked for them. An awkward, unpracticed meal of pancakes and eggs, and they ate at his dining table that had not seen guests in 8 years. Emma told him about school, about her dream of becoming a marine biologist, about a book she was reading on coral reefs. She asked him questions about building skyscrapers, and he found himself explaining structural engineering to a 12-year-old girl, simplifying concepts, watching her understand, feeling useful in a way that had nothing to do with profit margins. As Emma explored the penthouse, Marcus turned to Sarah. I want to offer you a position, he said carefully. Director of the Claire Hendricks Foundation. Real salary, benefits, a future. Sarah stiffened immediately. I can't accept charity. It's not charity, Marcus said firmly. Sarah, the foundation has been running on autopilot since Claire died. I couldn't bear to touch it, so I hired people who treated it like a tax write-off, who processed applications without caring about the people behind them. I need someone who understands what Claire was trying to build, someone who knows what it means to be on the other side of that kindness. He met her eyes. I need someone who has spent 10 years proving they understand what it means to give without expecting anything in return. That's not charity. That's the most important job in this company. Sarah looked at Emma, at her daughter laughing in the winter light, at the life she wanted to give her. She looked at Marcus, at the broken man trying to rebuild himself into someone worthy of the woman they both loved. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I accept. The transformation did not happen overnight. But it happened. Marcus and Sarah met every morning in the foundation offices, reviewing applications from people whose stories Sarah understood intimately and Marcus was learning to see. They rebuilt the foundation from its core, hiring staff who had themselves been helped, creating programs that addressed not just immediate needs, but systemic barriers. Marcus listened to Sarah in a way he had not listened to anyone in years, and Sarah found her voice growing stronger, her confidence blooming under the validation of being truly heard. Marcus began walking the floors of Hendricks Tower, learning names he had ignored for a decade. Thomas, the security guard who had 3 daughters in college. Maria in accounting, who sent money home to her parents in Guatemala. James in maintenance, who painted watercolors on weekends. Each person became real to him, 3-dimensional, worthy of being known. He started programs for childcare assistance, educational grants, health support for employees struggling with medical debt. The company that had been built on profit alone began to operate with purpose. Sarah flourished. She hired people who reminded her of who she had been, gave them chances they had been denied elsewhere, and watched them grow. She spoke at conferences, her story becoming a testament to what was possible when kindness met opportunity. The woman who had once hidden her face now stood in rooms full of strangers and commanded their attention, her voice steady, her message clear. Everyone deserves to be seen. Emma thrived in ways Sarah had only dreamed possible. Marcus became an unexpected mentor, taking her to construction sites, explaining the mathematics of engineering, encouraging her marine biology passion with books and museum memberships. He set up a college fund without telling Sarah, justifying it as an investment in the future when she discovered it and protested. Emma called him Uncle Marcus, and the title made his chest tight with emotion he no longer feared. The company culture shifted. Employees who had once been numbers became people. Profit remained important, but it was no longer the only measure of success. Other CEOs noticed, called Marcus soft, questioned his methods. He smiled and showed them the retention rates, the productivity increases, the innovation that came from workers who felt valued. Profit with purpose, he told them, was not weakness, but wisdom. Marcus began dating again. Tentative lunches that became dinners. A relationship with a professor of literature who made him laugh, and did not mind that he still kept Claire's photograph on his desk. Healing was not forgetting, he learned. It was making room for new joy alongside old love. Sarah found confidence she had not known she possessed, dated occasionally herself, though nothing serious. She had Emma, had her work, had a friendship with Marcus that was built on shared loss and mutual respect. They met for coffee every week, the way Sarah had once met with Claire, and spoke of foundation projects and life, and the woman who had brought them together. Claire's legacy was not just what she had built, but what she had inspired others to build. And in that, she remained more alive than memory, more present than grief. She had become not an ending but a beginning, and that was the greatest gift of all. 1 year later, Christmas Eve arrived, not with silence but with celebration. The lobby of Hendricks Tower hummed with life as employees gathered, their faces bright with anticipation. Marcus stood beside Sarah near the main entrance, watching as Emma, now 13, and glowing with purpose, helped distribute envelopes to each person leaving for the holiday. Inside each envelope was a generous bonus and a handwritten note thanking them by name for their specific contributions to the company. It had been Sarah's idea, the personal touch, and Marcus had spent weeks writing notes to people he now knew, really knew, as individuals rather than job titles. The foundation had helped hundreds in the past year. Single mothers found childcare and job training. Veterans received housing assistance and mental health support. Students earned scholarships that made impossible dreams suddenly achievable. The Claire Hendricks Memorial Foundation had become what Claire had always envisioned, a bridge between those who had much and those who needed a chance, and Sarah had built that bridge with the same careful attention she had once given to hand-knitted scarves and wooden carvings. As the last employee left, wishing them Merry Christmas, Marcus turned to Sarah. "I have something for you," he said, and there was nervousness in his voice that made her curious. He led her and Emma to the east wing of the building, to a corridor that had been under renovation for months, closed off behind temporary walls. Marcus opened the door. The space beyond took Sarah's breath away. It was beautiful, all natural light and warm wood, with comfortable seating areas and private offices, resource rooms, and meeting spaces designed for dignity rather than processing. Above the entrance, carved into oak that matched the box Sarah had made, were the words, "The Claire Hendricks Memorial Center," and below, on a bronze plaque, "Sarah Mitchell, Director." Sarah's hand flew to her mouth, tears already streaming down her face. Emma grabbed her other hand, squeezing tight. "Mom, your name is on the wall," she whispered, awed. Marcus handed Sarah a wrapped package, small and square. She opened it with trembling fingers. Inside was a photograph in a silver frame, and Sarah gasped at the impossible image it contained. Claire, young and radiant, stood beside Marcus, his arm around her waist. But the photo had been expanded, digitally and seamlessly, to include Sarah on Claire's other side, and in front of all three adults stood Emma, smiling. Four people who had never stood together in life, united in this moment through love and technology and intention. "Family isn't just blood," Marcus said softly, his own eyes wet. "It's who shows up. It's who stays when staying is hard. It's who keeps loving even when the person who connected you is gone." He looked at Sarah, at Emma, at the center that would carry Claire's name and Sarah's vision forward into the future. "Thank you for showing up for 10 years. Thank you for reminding me that Claire's love didn't die with her, that it lives in every person who chooses kindness over convenience, connection over isolation, giving over taking." Sarah could not speak. She simply stepped forward and embraced Marcus. And Emma wrapped her arms around both of them, and they stood in the entrance of the memorial center. Three people who had been broken by loss and remade by love, who had learned that grief shared was grief lessened, that kindness given was kindness multiplied, that the greatest memorial to the dead was living the way they had taught you to live. And so a decade of anonymous gifts became something far greater. A reminder that the smallest acts of kindness can echo through years, that grief shared is grief lessened, that sometimes the person we are trying to repay has already given us everything we need to pay it forward. Marcus never forgot that cold Christmas Eve when mystery became meaning, when a janitor became family, when he finally understood that Claire's greatest gift was not what she gave him but what she taught him, to see people, really see them, and to never stop being a gift to others. This Christmas, who might need your gift? Who in your life is invisible, struggling, hoping that someone will notice they exist? The greatest gift is not something you buy in a store or wrap in expensive paper. The greatest gift is showing up, paying attention, choosing to see the people the world has taught you to overlook. Sarah showed up for 10 years before Marcus knew her name. How long will you wait to show up for someone who needs you? Like, share, and subscribe to pass this story forward. And may you be both the giver and receiver of gifts that cannot be measured but only felt, gifts that echo long after the wrapping paper has been thrown away. Gifts that remind us all that we are seen, we are valued, we are never as alone as we fear.